We've reached the final game in the Best of Build trilogy. Released in 1997, Blood took everything that Duke Nukem and Shadow Warrior did and just perfected it. The gunplay is even more buttery smooth, the weapons are way more creative than those games, and while some of the maps are not as iconic as the ones found in Duke 3D, the level design is still arguably superior. Blood is a massive love letter to the horror movie genre, and all of the different references and nods are so entertaining to see play out. Caleb is the main protagonist of Blood, and he puts Duke Nukem and Lo Wang to shame. This guy is just so fucking cool, and his voice is just as iconic. Caleb's voice is not based on Asian stereotypes or is trying to be a Schwarzenegger impression, as it's way more calm and collected, except when he screams out in pain or goes to see a carnival. Blood is much more gothic than the previous Build Engine games, and it has a timeless quality. In that sense, Blood reminds me of the early Castlevania games, with all of the gothic imagery and with both games being inspired by old school horror. Like I said earlier, the gunplay feels more fluid compared to Duke or Shadow Warrior, and it's something to get used to when first playing. The player's air movements feel floaty in the best way possible, and the way that you duck and dive through the space becomes incredibly addicting. Along with the smooth, fast movement that Blood has to offer, the weapons are even better. Of course you have the standard shotgun and machine gun type weapons, but there's a lot more experimental weapons compared to Duke or Shadow Warrior. For one, a huge component of Blood is the dynamite that you can toss at enemies. At first, you only get normal bundles of dynamite that you can lob across the room. If you perform the alternate fire with the dynamite, it will bounce across a wall. This is great for setting up traps, and there's also other methods of tossing dynamite later on in the game that are more controlled. The standard shotgun is here in Blood, but holy fucking shit, this shotgun is really anything but standard. The sound effect of the shotgun and the pitch perfect animation it has makes it one of the most satisfying weapons to use in any first person shooter. Whenever you get the gun's akimbo power up for the shotgun, it's open season, and everything just works. The Tommy gun is another badass weapon that has a number of solid, practical uses within combat. The way that the player can use the alternate fire mode to spray bullets with it Rambo style is simply wonderful, and even though it's one of the more novel features of Blood, I think it's still very entertaining to pull off. The Napalm Launcher is an important part of the explosive weapon family, and what can I really say? It's an excellent rocket launcher. Watching the enemies burn as you light them up with explosives will never get tiresome, and it's one of the aspects of Blood that sets it apart from the rest. Blood really took everything that made Duke Nukem and Shadow Warrior great games and just evolved it. The level design and the overall gunplay might be subjective, but there are so many other little touches that Blood adds to make it better than its contemporaries. As for the other weapons in your arsenal, there is a spray can which sets enemies on fire when used, the voodoo doll which is such a great idea for a weapon, and the Tesla cannon, which basically acts like the plasma rifle from Doom, except it's stronger. Saving your Tesla ammo for when you need to use it on a big enemy is a good idea, but that's really only applicable advice in episode 3 and episode 4, as that's when you actually get the gun. I like that there are some normal weapons and some weird experimental weapons, as that keeps the gunplay fresh and it encourages players to try out different strategies and combinations. The first level in Blood is basically retro FPS perfection. The entire level wraps around and there's plenty of areas that you can blow up to create shortcuts, similar to the opening maps in Duke Nukem 3D. Even in level 1, there is a lot of variety in the environments. There's the starting graveyard area, the funeral home interior, and there's also the hallway where all of the dead bodies are stored. I love this map, and I think in general, episode 1 is the strongest episode out of the lots. It has the most variety, and some of the set pieces are still extremely impressive. Episode 2 is another great set of levels. Episode 3 is quite underrated in my opinion, and its city maps are still pretty damn solid, and episode 4 is definitely the least memorable. Back to the first episode, E1M2 is located in a train station and there's plenty of little rooms to explore, which is nice. The highlight of episode 1 for me is the next level though, when the player runs across a moving train. There are moments when you are on top of the train, as well as inside the train carriages, and it's all brilliant stuff. Blood feels so refined compared to its predecessors, and I think the level design peaks in this episode. I mean, the carnival level is another standout, and it's one more example of how Blood is full of detail and fun set pieces. The last two levels before we get up to the boss are kind of bland by comparison, since they are just set in run-of-the-mill cathedrals and temples, but they are still solid maps regardless. Episode 2 is probably the most consistent episode in the game, and that's because most of the levels have something to do with snow or ice. E2M1 features a desolate ship trapped next to shards of ice, and the atmosphere is incredible. As the episode goes on, Blood takes major inspiration from The Shining and even has a level based on the Overlook Hotel. This is fantastic, and I love the open-ended level design that the map has to offer. Plenty of rooms to explore and plenty of items to collect. E2M5, The Haunting, attempts to do the same thing, but everything looks way too similar and it's too easy to get lost. As I said before, the third episode is probably the most underrated, but I like it for what it is. Episode 3 is shorter than most of the other episodes, but I personally don't mind that if all of the levels are quality. I love the olden day looking street corners and cityscape in the first level, and the way that you blow up sections of buildings and then jump through to the other side is awesome. The environmental destruction gets insane in Blood, and I'm all for it. E3M2 features more commercial buildings like banks and butcher shops, and there's even more rooftop traversal. I love how these city levels aren't really tied to any point in time, and they borrow elements from multiple periods. E3M3 sags the episode down a lot for me, as it's located in a sewage system and it's pretty annoying to navigate. I don't really care how good your game's gunplay is, these kind of levels bog down the experience. At least the next level makes up for it completely, with E3M4 being one of the best levels in Blood. Set in an abandoned hospital, this map is atmospheric, a little bit eerie, and has a touch of dark humor. I love the little encounter in the morgue with the small hands that break out and try to grab you. It's excellent, and this level is one of the highlights of the entire game for me. The next set of levels don't keep up the same bar of quality, but they are still decent anyway. Episode 4 is still the most forgettable though, barring the Camp Crystal Lake and Dr. Frankenstein lab levels. Both of those maps are very damn good, but the rest are so-so in my opinion. Not terrible, but not exactly mind-blowing either. That being said, Blood has terrific level design if we take a look at it as a whole, and it complements the gunplay well. The buttery smooth action coupled with the horror aesthetic and good map structure makes Blood an excellent shooter, and probably the best FPS game on the build engine. I have to concede and say that even though Duke Nukem 3D is one of my favorite video games ever made, I'm talking like top 5 list here, Blood mechanically is probably the superior game. It just raises the bar so much, and even though it is hard to get into if you're a newcomer due to its harsh difficulty, please stick with it because it is that good. The weapons are creative, the references are so entertaining for horror fans, and the gunplay is quite varied considering that this game only features around 9 or so weapons. The difficulty of Blood makes it a little tough to recommend for less experienced FPS players, but if you have a decent handle on old school shooters, then Blood is the fucking best.